There we go. Okay, we are up live here. We're going to give everybody an opportunity to log into our Medical Mondays. So we'll give everybody a chance to log in and we'll get going with the medical update. While we're waiting for everybody, how's everything going over there with you, Kimberly?
Good, going good.
Dr. Marsh, I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing, what I'm thinking. Dr. Marsh. You've earned it.
Oh, God.
So that's like from a TV show. It's from a TV show or movie or something. You've earned it.
Something like that.
Yeah, right. So give everybody a chance to kind of log in. Good stuff. We will get started shortly. What's going on there? Right. Got a few viewers popping in. All right. If they don't catch it, they can catch it on the rewind. So I'll keep it moving. So again, this is Corey Strong, your next congressman for the Tennessee's 9th Congressional District, and it's here with our Medical Monday. So the month of April, we have promised to come to you every Monday with some updates on what's going on here medically in Shelby County. And our guest again this week is Dr. Kimberly Marsh over at Mid-South Pulmonary, and she's going to take us through a few of the things that we got going on. And so how's it going over there with you, Kim?
It's going good.
Good, that's awesome. And so we're going to, first of all, we'll start off, again, tell people a little bit about the practice and what you guys do over at Mid-South Pulmonary. So give you guys a chance to plug the business.
Yeah, so we're one of the largest pulmonary groups in the city. We cover the ICUs at several hospitals all across the city, as well as many pulmonary issues in the hospital. And we also have a clinic at 5050 Poplar where we see, several hundred people a day coming in with various issues.
And so, and for our simple-minded people, pulmonary is what again?
I'm sorry. So lung issues. So asthma, COPD. We do a lot of sleep apnea, things like that.
Okay, which is good. Like people need to know what that means. And obviously, with coronavirus, it is the respiratory issues that end up being of concern and make this such a severe virus. And so, so right person, right time for what we're doing here. And so, as you did last week, can you kind of walk us through? I know you were in the hospitals last week, so kind of walk us through maybe one or two things that you guys are seeing out there that are what might be of interest to people that want to know what's going on the front lines.
Yeah. So as we talked about last week, not too much has actually changed in the hospitals. We've got about roughly the same number of people, maybe just a few more who are sick enough to be in the hospital or in the ICU. So that's good that we're kind of holding steady, which is good. We did touch on last week how cases in the overall hospital are down. So it seems like people who are sick with other things aren't really just coming in anymore, which we talked about last week. Just to remind everyone, still come to the hospital if you need to come to the hospital. We've got space. We've got safe areas. You're not going to catch the coronavirus in the hospital. So, definitely still come in. Kind of the same trend as last week.
Most definitely. So I don't confuse people, I'm going to change the name here really quickly. So that's super dope. And I think that's important. And actually, I was watching a CNN report that I guess Dr. Sanjay Gupta was talking about. Some people were responding to the lower estimates as far as deaths and hospital utilization as the fact that it led to lower care. And I think obviously that's one way of looking at it. I think the first thing he said, I think we should be happy about is maybe this is not going to have the as drastic effect. And let's be clear, people that are passing away, this is a very serious illness. But as far as the number of deaths and the number of hospital beds that maybe need to be used, that some of those estimates were pretty high. And that happens anytime that you're looking at anything that is exponential. So a little number change means a big number change. But I think the other piece of it is availability, and depends on the locale that you're in, right? And so in New York, I think they would struggle to agree with the idea that, that the estimates were too high, or that they were able to actually give people that type of service. But I think from what you're saying here in Memphis is there's still availability, and that people should take, if they have other health issues, that they should make sure that they come in or give a call to their doctor.
Yeah, definitely. In places like New York, which is what we're hearing a lot about, they're having to divert a lot of other doctors who are in different specialties to the ER, to the ICU, because they just have so many people and they're overwhelmed. It's not a false statement to say that other care could suffer in a place like that, but that's definitely not the case here in Memphis or even in Tennessee. I referenced a website last time when we talked, healthdata.org, and a lot of what they do is look at resource utilization. And so if you go specifically to Tennessee, even as we hit our peak here, we're only going to be at maybe a third to a half of the ICU beds, and we have enough ventilators and we have enough physicians. So we're not having to do the things that they do in New York to divert, care from other specialties. So definitely, we're still able to address all the other issues. Our clinics are still open. As we talked about last week, a lot of other clinics, even though they might be closed, are doing telemedicine. So you really should be able to still receive the care for your other non-corona related illnesses.
Right. And again, I think the stay-at-home order from the state is still in effect. So for elective surgeries, got it. Like, you got to wait on those. But if it's not elective, it's serious. If you are, if you're having pains, internal pains, if your leg hurts,
if you're having appendicitis or something, come to the hospital. They're still going to operate on you. They're still going to do the things that they need to do. If you need a knee surgery that's not emergent, that's probably not going to get done. But, things that are really life-threatening, obviously, or even emergent, are going to get done.
No, thank you for clarifying that. I also wanted to take an opportunity to look at some of the data that we're showing from the Shelby County Health Department, and actually, and not ask you to like be an epidemiologist or anything, but just talk to from your perspective.
I do have a master's in that.
Okay, of course you do.
No, I'm not kidding. I do, but
Good stuff. So if you look here at a cumulative case count, you can see it. And so if you look at it there, we're still rising every day. And you saw a couple of jumps towards the end of the week last week where people are still getting this. And so something that's interesting here is we're hearing the term peak. And peak is used in two different distinct kind of manners. And you just mentioned one earlier. I'd like you to go over what it means for like peak utilization and maybe even peak death in ICU, and then peak for the virus itself, particularly as it pertains to flattening the curve. I think that's important for people to understand that are getting stir crazy with social distancing, what those two peaks mean.
Right. So, again, the website that we talked about last week, the healthdata.org, that's out of the University of Washington. And what they're doing is analyzing peak resource use and peak, deaths from coronavirus. Per area. You can look at it by state. So basically, they're estimating that our peak resource use is probably going to come up sometime in the next week. Right. Now, the epidemiologists out of Vanderbilt and who are working specifically with data on Tennessee and the different counties have now said that the peak, infection rate might be middle of May. There was an article in the Commercial Appeal the other day about that. So later than we thought. And, while that kind of sounds scary and maybe like things are getting worse, is actually a function of flattening the curve. So we aren't on an upslope as fast as we thought we would be before. And that's, because of social isolation and distancing and and staying inside. So even though we might not yet be at the peak number of cases, things are definitely kind of being drawn out more than we thought they were actually.
And so for peak utilization and peak death, like that's like it hit the hardest, and like that's the most like severe as far as we are ICU. We're expect to see that sometime in the next week. Right,
and that's all a function of basically what happened like 2 weeks ago, with transmission and whatnot. Right. And so the fact that the peak index has kind of gone farther out just means that we're doing a good job now.
Right, but we're also slowing. So like you were doing a good job, but like the peak number of people that will get it, they might be mild. It won't overwhelm our medical systems. It's still sometime further in the future, and that's based on
exactly. And obviously the peak is not a predefined number. So with a peak that's farther out than we originally thought, it's probably a lower number of people. Like if the peak was going to be tomorrow, it would be shooting things up. Whereas it's kind of, again, flattening the curve. We just kind of think about lowering ignoring everything and coming to a peak.
Okay, awesome. And I think that's important to differentiate between the two. As you see this graph going up, and what flattening looks like and what the maximum amount looks like is, that's not the cumulative case count. That's not the number of people that have it. It's, how we're stretching our resources. And I think that's important for people to understand, because we're still several weeks away from seeing potentially that peak case count where we start coming over the hill, and we can even begin discussion of what it looks like to relax kind of social isolation. And so I know people are kind of stir crazy, but I think it's important to understand the difference between those two, because when people say, oh, it's this week, that means we're coming out of it. And it's like, no, people still get infected, but it's at a slower rate.
So, by stretching out the peak and to say it again, flattening the curve, while that's good on one hand, on the other hand, it means that social distancing is going to have to happen for like a little bit longer than we originally thought.
No, I appreciate that.
Good, bad, it's.
Oh, no, I'm with you. I appreciate that that clarification. It's good for people to understand. So moving here, we see the negative and positive test dating and or test data as of yesterday. And so about 9% of the people that were tested, or close to 10%, are tested as positive. And so I think this kind of falls in line with what it's been most of the time here. I think is whenever we would get to comprehensive testing, you would potentially see that number go down, but that would require obviously more testing, right?
Right, definitely.
And so moving into this, I think these are two things, and this is something that I'm going to focus on and kind of put some information out about tomorrow. This is the percentage of positive tests versus the number of tests. And so some could say this is a function of the number of tests, but if we look at kind of demographically where we are, you see a high percentage number of tests in a couple of zip code areas, 30107, 30108, which is North Memphis. Then you see 38186 and 38128 down in South Memphis. And then you see 38118 and 38141 Parkway Village, Hickory Hill. But then if you look at the next chart, which is the number of actual tests administered, those same areas actually have very low test rates, right? And so not coincidentally, based off information that was shared last week and that we spoke about, these are predominantly Black communities, North Memphis, South Memphis, Parkway Village, Hickory Hill, and you see very low test rates and you see high percentage of testing. And I just wanted to bring that up in this particular case because I want to really enforce the idea that these are communities that desperately need us to engage. And yes, it's great in Whitehaven that we have high test rates, but in our communities across the city, there's more testing that's needed to be done. And there's a direct correlation between, the number of tests you give and how many people actually you test with that amount that show up as positive, right? And so we have to continue to push to make sure those resources are there. And even in 30109, like you have, I think Methodist South Hospitals there, and as well as Christ Community Health are in that neighborhood. But if you look at kind of Parkway Village and maybe even in North Memphis, those locations aren't available. And that's why it's important to make sure that it's available in all those places. And what I'm pushing for is more proactive policies, whatever they're doing in the national state government, that Shelby County be a little bit different and be more proactive in supporting our communities.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and just looking at that, so you think about if the rates are higher in those, how many more people in those communities actually, have this, and we don't even know because we're not testing them.
Right. Exactly. And so, and move to the last one I wanted to talk to about today. This is something they've started to put up and use the term comorbidity, which is a mouthful and a handful. And it talks about these. And so, I can explain what comorbidity means. It is another condition that makes you more susceptible to the virus and more susceptible potentially to death, and so or fatality. And so it lists out the four kind of commonly, and again, this is not all the data that's there. It's just the data that they've tested so far, but go over some of these conditions, because I think, you say cardiac condition or respiratory condition, people may not offhand know what those are, but could you go over some of those so people can identify, hey, I'm susceptible to this and maybe I should behave differently?
Right. So, when they started looking at this, it was a lot different than people thought, because you think the people who have lung problems would be the most susceptible to this. But actually, when they say cardiac condition on this, what they really mean is hypertension or high blood pressure. So they found that was one of the most common comorbid conditions. And now, is that a function of the fact that hypertension and high blood pressure is so widespread? we don't really know, but the fact is, people who have that, seem to be more susceptible for some reason. Other cardiac conditions that they could be talking about are, history of a heart attack in the past, heart failure or something like that. Respiratory conditions primarily means asthma or COPD slash emphysema. And then
Okay.
diabetes, but high blood pressure and diabetes was really kind of the highest comorbidities that they have been seeing.
Got it. And that's very widespread. I mean,
Yeah.
my parents are on, blood pressure medication, right? So that's a very normal, common thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in our community if I'm not frequently going to the hospital, then that might not affect me. But and the reality is, particularly as it pertains to obesity and diabetes, but even in some of these other conditions, those are happening earlier and earlier, particularly in the Black community. And the Black community, which has lower health outcomes and more exposure to diseases like this or conditions like this, obviously makes them susceptible. And so there are people early and earlier on that are showing these conditions, which makes them obviously susceptible to this disease.
Definitely. And, I mean, people let's say you just have high blood pressure. I can't tell me how many people they take their medicine, it's well controlled. You ask them, do you have any medical conditions? And they say no, because their blood pressure is well controlled by medicines. It's like, no, well, you still have that condition, it's just well controlled, but you're living a normal life. You're a healthy person. So it's kind of alarming to find that is maybe something that would make you more susceptible to this. So it's just, again, really important that if you're having symptoms to go get tested, just to kind of listen to your body and do what you think is right and what needs to be done.
Most definitely. And so thank you for going through a little bit of that information. I think that's super informative. I know a lot of people might see that and just kind of offhand not necessarily know what all those things mean, but I think it's super important to cover them and be very specific so people understand them. So thank you for that. And also, again, thank you for what you do and using your brain and sacrificing yourself to help others. I know that doctors have a creed that they follow in the medical community, and in times like this, that's when it really matters, right? It's when the rubber hits the road. And appreciate everything that you do and people like you do. And so any kind of wrap up closing remarks that you have for people as we go through this second iteration of Medical Mondays.
Yeah, basically the same things as last week. Keep social distancing. It's working. I know it feels terrible, but it is really working. If you're sick with anything else, seek care. We definitely have availability in the hospitals and the clinics, whatever you need, and just, continue to kind of take care of yourself that way.
Most definitely. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I know this is informative for everybody that has its opportunity to tune in. I know that people that listened last week thought it was very informative. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the information. And we'll check in with you next week. For everybody watching, thank you for tuning in. And again, stay home, stay safe. And until next week, keep an eye on one strong. Thanks.